my woman of gold, and she's not alone. I don't mean to be bold, but may I hold your hand? But she ain't no witch, and I love the way she twitch, But she ain't no witch, and I love the way she twitch,
Let's say you want to start a wedding photography business, but you have absolutely no experience whatsoever. And you're wondering, is this even a good business to get into? Hello, everybody. You know, wedding photography has been my bread and butter for many, many years, and I have kind of an interesting and unique story on how I got started, which I'd like to go over with you in just a little while. But I started part-time, very, very part-time, with hardly any equipment. And at the time, I was in the Air Force. It was around 1967, 68. I was around 18, 19 years old at the time. So I was in it for a real long time. And wedding photography does keep you in great shape, all except it turns your hair gray. So I want to warn you about that. It was around this time that I became serious about photography, and I knew that this is what I wanted to do when I got out of the Air Force. Now, being in the Air Force, and I worked in we had a shop in the hangar, and one of the fellows that I worked with in the hangar, he was getting married, and he knew that I was a photo enthusiast. And actually, I started a little business already doing portraits of servicemen and their families. And I got to tell you about this advertising I did. And it was the best advertising as far as getting results go, dollar for dollar. But the results themselves were just fantastic. What I did was at the BX bulletin board, the base exchange, I put up an index card about this size, 3 by 5, and I put on it that I'm available for portraits, individual portraits, and family portraits, and that's how it took off. And believe it or not, I got quite a bit of business with that little ad. Very, very cost effective. Cost me nothing but that little card. And I met some really great people in doing that. So not only did I do some headshots of service people, but the families, and I also ended up doing some band photographs and some other jobs like passports. So, but anyway, this fellow knew that I was a photo enthusiast, loved photography, and he told me he was getting married, and I believe it was maybe a couple of months or so, but I didn't advertise wedding photography. Well, first of all, I knew nothing about it. And of course, I could have been deployed anytime. So I didn't want to commit myself to any kind of a commitment. I was, beyond maybe a month or two. But anyway, he asked me, and I thought about it, and I agreed. I didn't charge him anything, but I didn't do it for free. I charged him, I did the wedding. I charged him just for reprints, and I gave him a really great deal just for kind of a favor, and it also gave me experience. But I had no clue what I was doing. I did all the wrong things. At the time, of course, this was film-based. I used a 2 1/4, it was called a Minolta Autocord. It was a 2 1/4 by 2 1/4 twin lens reflex camera. It's a pretty decent little camera. And it had the normal lens on there, which I believe was a 75 millimeter lens at the time. And you had a finder, a waist level finder that you had to look through, and it's really hard to see through there because it was an old camera. I believe I paid $20 for it, but that's all I had. And I also had a flash unit, no backup, no spares. So this is something that I wouldn't recommend to anyone getting started today. And of course, forget I had an assistant. I had no assistant. I was just by myself, just getting started. I didn't even have a suit. In fact, one of my friends in the barracks, he found out that I was doing this wedding, so he let me borrow his suit. We were the same size, and it was really a nice suit. So I put that on, and I drove out to the wedding in my 1964 Dodge Dart GT. It's a beautiful little car. And I took a few shots of the service, and some portraits afterwards. Nothing really fantastic because I knew nothing about what I was supposed to do except maybe common sense stuff of doing the family portraits and bride and groom. Because even as a kid, I had a lot of relatives of mine that got married and we were invited to their wedding. So I saw the wedding photographer there and some of the things that he was doing. So as it turned out, that was my experience with starting my not only wedding photography, but my portrait photography business. Because once you do weddings, you're going to find that there's a lot of other business that you can get from wedding photography. Just even alone, the bride and groom may need engagement portraits, and sometimes they need other portraits for business. And you will also get requests for family portraits on both sides, before and after the wedding. So there's a pretty good spin-off with getting business in wedding photography once you get established. Now, once I did get established, it took me quite a long time. I didn't really, because I was in the Air Force, I couldn't really do much except I just stayed studying my craft, and I took advantage of the GI Bill early, and I took a correspondence course in photography, and it was a great course. It was called the Famous Photographer School, and there were some really outstanding photographers in there, people like Philip E. Hausman, Alfred Eisenstedt, and a lot of great photographers that worked for Life magazines that had their own business doing architectural photography, photojournalism things, but it was just a great experience, and that's how I got my start in doing it that way. So I stayed with it for many, many years. I'm going to just fast forward many, many years, and then I got to the point where I had a pretty successful business, even part-time. I had a lot of weddings scheduled. I believe I was up to doing over 60 weddings a year part-time. And I had other shooters, and I had second shooters, and I had assistants. So with that, I learned there's another good way of people getting started, because I didn't have to advertise anymore that I needed shooters because I had a pretty good reputation in my area. So I would get a lot of people would send me their resume or call me or even stopped in asking if I had any work for them or if I would hire them. So that would be a really good way of people getting started in photography, is to become a second shooter. Now, what if you have no experience in weddings? Well, that was the case with some of my second shooters. So I would hire them first as an assistant, and I saw that they had a really good, pleasing personality, and I would hire them based on that. And then I saw they also had a good work ethic, and I could teach them certain things about, being a wedding photography shooter. So that would be probably the best way, well, maybe the quickest way, and possibly the best way of getting started in wedding photography, is to become a second shooter and see if you can work with a photographer, if maybe he'll let you use some of the samples. He'll give you some samples, images of the ones that you take, and you can put those aside. So when you're ready to do weddings on your own, you're able to use those images. So in my case, because I had no experience and I had nothing to show anybody, it was just word of mouth. And then I had a bunch of friends got married back in Pennsylvania because I was stationed down in North Carolina. So, and they would ask me, and I drove up to do their wedding, and then there was others. So I guess I was in that age bracket where a lot of people I knew started getting married. And that's how I got started. It was a slow process, but I had no samples. And once I did a couple of weddings, maybe 3 weddings or so, I started putting together a little portfolio of albums and portraits, and then I would start to advertise that way. So 2 ways of starting your photography business is look for a position as a second shooter or possibly even as an assistant if you have to for a successful wedding photographer in your area. Or you can do it on your own, which is going to be time consuming. But I had no place to go and I was in no hurry. And I actually I had a great time doing weddings. I looked at it as a more of a journey. I enjoyed the experience just going along with it. And there's no greater feeling, even with some good assistance, after a wedding when you work really hard and you're working hard for the bride and groom and the families. You want to give them the best photographs possible. There's no greater experience than you get after the wedding, knowing that you did a really great job and you and the couple and the families all had a great time together. It's very, very rewarding. So this is going to be a continuation. If it's popular enough, I'll continue it. If not, I'll just go do something else. And also, if you do have any questions, feel free to write them in the comments. And in future videos, I'll see if I can answer some of your questions. But photography could be a good experience or a good business for you and a good business experience. However, you got to be careful today because of the workflow. The digital workflow can be very, very time consuming. So once you work that out, that's something that we'll talk about in the future also. So I thank you very, very much, and I hope to see you again soon.